In Chapter 6, we explore missions and evangelization from the day of Pentecost to the rise of Christendom early in the 4th century on through the conquest of Constantinople, now Istanbul, in 1453, and also beyond the walls of Christendom into the East. In Chapter 7, we trace the encounter with Christian missions in the Age of Discovery and colonial expansion during the early modern era, roughly 1500 to 1800. And then we move on to explore it through most of the Great Century in missions, 1800 to 1914. Finally, in Chapter 8, we're going to look at 20th century missions, which was a phenomenal century by any account. By the end of the 2nd century, the church had grown exponentially. By the year 180, Christians could be found in all the provinces of the empire. Eusebius, a later church historian, said that, first of all, Mark preached the gospel in Alexandria, John went to Ephesus, and Thomas and Andrew ventured east of the Mesopotamian river valley. Other influential witnesses included Pantaenus, who reportedly visited India. The church also journeyed into Asia. So Thomas journeyed eastward, arriving on the Malabar coast of South India around AD 50. The 6th century Alexandrian merchant Cosmas, the Indian navigator, discovered there were Christians already in Sri Lanka. And upon his return to Italy in 1295, Marco Polo, who had traveled to the court of the Mongol ruler Kublai Khan, described breathtaking adventures and unexpected encounters with Christians in far-off China. Missionaries were sent to reach the farthest reaches of Europe as well. And so missionaries were sent by the church, Augustine of Canterbury in Britain, Cyril and Methodius in Moravia. Also, we see that captured slaves sowed the gospel seed wherever they went. So we see Patrick in Ireland. Businessmen shared their faith, and some returned from exile to their homelands to be a witness there. This map shows the movement of Irish, Celtic, and British missions to Europe from the 6th to the 18th century. And the church had securely established itself in Europe, so that by the year 1500, the entire region from Europe to Russia had essentially been Christianized. Though divided politically, the various territorial states had affirmed the Christian faith, boasted Christian rulers, and promoted Christian culture. Yet the outward victory of Christianity masked the persistent endurance of non-Christian practices that remained hidden from the public view. And so given the vigorous new mission thrust of the Catholic Church in the 16th century, it might have been remembered then as a new era in Catholic mission. Instead, Martin Luther guaranteed that historians would call it the period of the Reformation. The ensuing division of Western Christianity between Catholics and Protestants, their respective mission endeavors, and the widening influence of European culture transformed the world scene in the centuries that followed. The Reformers, faced with a host of other problems, gave relatively little attention to mission in non-Christian lands. Anabaptists, they did focus on evangelism, and so they had the first missionary conference in 1529, and they had sent out apostles throughout Europe. However, persecution hampered their efforts. And then spiritual renewal sparked revivals, and so revival came to Lutheran and Reformed churches in continental Europe, to evangelical and Methodist revivals in the United Kingdom, and to North American English colonies in the form of the Great Awakening. So with revival came a renewed mission focus. So the German pietists evangelized the coast of southern India in the 1700s. The Moravians evangelized the West Indies in the New World, and a variety of missionary endeavors. One of the greatest missionary pioneers was William Carey, and he wrote the book An Inquiry into the Obligations of Christians to Use Means for the Conversion of the Heathens, and he founded the Baptist Missionary Society in 1792. We cannot underestimate the significance of revivals on missions. Here's a list of some that fueled the church's missionary outreach. The Second Great Awakening in America, Dwight Moody's annual student conferences, the student volunteer movement for foreign missions organizations, holiness revivals and supernatural power, indigenous revivals in places like Jamaica. These revivals did produce spiritual fruit. In fact, there were some 25 revivals from around the world. They began with an awakening in Tahiti and end with the East African revival starting in Uganda towards the end of the 19th century. So revivals transformed indigenous workers into key players in the churches. Revivals then combined with the demise of colonialism and the emergence of newly independent churches challenged the equation that Christianity was equivalent to Western culture. In the West, there was significant missionary activity by the mainland or mainline denominations. So the Edinburgh World Missionary Conference in 1910 was the starting point for ecumenical developments, culminating in the formation of the World Council of Churches in 1948. However, liberal theology, the social gospel, gained influence in the mainline churches and steadily moved their mission work in the direction of humanitarianism. So social action rose above evangelism in terms of their priorities. And because of these shifts, there were cracks in the unity then between the evangelical and mainline Protestant denominations. So evangelical and mainline Protestants began to divide over doctrine and strategy. The fundamentalist modernist controversy that raged through American Protestant denominations in the 1920s added tension here, and in a 1932 report of the Layman's Foreign Missions Inquiry, that report was really a lightning rod into this crisis, highlighting the problems that needed to be addressed. Eventually, evangelical missions surpassed missions originating in those mainline churches. And so while many of the mainline missionaries remained evangelical, the movement really ran out of energy after the mid-century. In contrast, conservative evangelical missions surged forward in scope of operations and their number of personnel and began to have greater influence. In the rather 20th century, then, mission agencies used numerous innovative methods to reach the nations. And here are some of the more notable methods that they use: Bible translation, radio, aviation, missions in depth, and theological education by extension, or sometimes called TEE. Additionally, numerous parachurch ministries arose. They included InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, the Urbana Missions Conferences, and World Vision. It's noteworthy that the church experienced another wave of revivals that further fueled missions. So beginning in the 1950s and 60s, Pentecostal movements arose among mainline Protestants, Roman Catholics, and even to a lesser extent among Eastern Orthodox Christians. And the charismatic renewal quickly attained global dimensions, and features of its spirituality could be found in large sectors of Christianity. So, although many charismatic Christians have not embraced all of the teachings of the Pentecostal movement, the breadth of the renewal indicates that 20th century Pentecostalism challenged virtually every branch of Christianity to review its understanding of the role of the Holy Spirit in the life and mission of the church. And so, by the 1980s, interest in the charismatic spirituality had grown in conservative evangelical ranks, notably in terms of thinking about spiritual gifts, prayer for the sick, and even the usefulness of exorcism or power encounters. And as the movement grew, insiders called it the third wave of the Holy Spirit. Leaders shied away from identification with the Pentecostal and charismatic movements, believed to be the first two waves of the movement. Meanwhile, there were significant changes in the Roman Catholic Church as a result of the Vatican Council, or Vatican II. And so the Second Vatican Council in the early 60s profoundly affected the outlook of the Catholic Church on the modern world, the contextualization of faith, their view of other Christians, and the non-Christian religions. The Council broadened the scope of those who will be redeemed. In an extraordinary action, it referred to Protestant and Eastern Orthodox Christians as separated brethren, in whom the Holy Spirit is at work. Furthermore, the Council recognized that those who have not yet heard the gospel have a relationship to the people of God in some fashion. Some will rather call the last 60 years the heyday of global missions. And never before in the history of Christianity has so much attention been placed on mission and missions than in the latter half of the 20th century. Missiologists like Donald McGavran explored the many aspects of presenting the Christian message in cross-cultural contexts and what factors produce church growth. The vastness and many shapes of Christianity became evident in David Barrett's World Christian Encyclopedia. Moreover, world conferences, schools, academic societies, journals, and books wielded considerable influence on the mission enterprise. So world conferences played a critical role, most notably the Lausanne Conference on World Evangelization. Peoples, then, rather than nations, became the focus. There is really a seismic shift in missions away from the West and toward the majority world. So over the course of the 20th century, the global weight of Christianity has actually shifted south. And today, the largest congregations of the world can be found in countries like Korea, Brazil, and Nigeria. The number of missionaries and mission agencies from majority world countries grew exponentially. Additionally, many of the indigenous churches in the majority world became more than self-governing. They actually also became self-theologizing.